Hi, thank you for watching Digging to China. I'm Dong Shong. If you have not done so already, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much. Since November 30, cities across China have been relaxing lockdown restrictions, and in mid-December, nearly all restrictions appear to have been dropped. Having had their daily lives dictated by COVID controls imposed by the state and the fear of the virus instilled by propaganda throughout the pandemic, the public is now told to be the first responsible person for your own health. In other words, to fend for themselves. State media and health officials have flipped from preaching the dangers of the virus to downplay its threat. Zhong Nanshan, a top COVID-19 expert and a key public voice in the pandemic, suggested that Omicron should really be called coronavirus cold. Does that mean that the Chinese Communist regime offered a concession to mollify the protesters? Will that be sufficient to pacify the aggrieved citizens? It worked, but only to a certain extent. For the migrant workers and the small business owners in urban villages who protested the lockdowns for their impact on income, relaxation of controls will help to reinstate their business operations. However, for the urban middle class and the students who have demanded political change for far beyond the COVID-19 framing, this concession will not be sufficient. Beijing has also been applying repression to the protesters. Citizens have had their phones randomly checked on the streets for downloading telegrams and other Western communication apps and for protest-linked content. Working with high-tech companies and large data platforms, the government has also used surveillance technology to track the movements of protest participants. The technology that failed to prevent people from turning up to the street earlier will be more effective in tracking targeted individuals. Once you are on the government's watch list, any signal for potential dissenting acts will be picked up quickly. However, none of these measures will extinguish the flame of anti-regime sentiments openly expressed in the streets of Shanghai and Beijing and across university campuses. In the past, although people had a long existing discontent against the government, they fear to act. Now, this critical psychological threshold for fear has broken and gave birth to a restive society that will be increasingly challenging to govern. But don't be mistaken, China's communist regime won't be toppled anytime soon. But the seeds of future protest movement have been sown. Looking back on the past few months, a lot has changed. These changes are beyond the cosmetic. The contentious activities in the aftermath of the 20th Party Congress are a manifestation of the regime's overreach beyond its capacity. On the surface, it was the triumphant consolidation of power that Xi Jinping secured a third term. But deep down, the undercurrent is indicating the legitimacy that has served the regime so well for years has been severely eroded. Looking back past year, 2022, it was truly a bad year for Xi Jinping despite he became the president for life. 10 years ago, Xi Jinping rose to such power in part because he was boring. More flamboyant figures such as his rival Bo Xilai were seen as dangerous by the party elders, semi-retired leaders who still played a strong role in selecting each generation of leadership. Xi was a solid, uncharismatic, competent fixer. This perception among party elders allowed him to escape the pressures that forced most ambitious princelings out of politics and into the private sector. Party elders feared that those ambitious princelings might accumulate too much power. They deemed Xi as a safe pair of hands. But throughout his time in office, Xi has proved anything but. He's doubled down on party control in every aspect of Chinese life. From the tech sector to sexuality to the cinema, rolling purges have decimated state institutions while the economy has suffered under the weight of constant government interferences. As a result, 3 decades of high growth were coming to an end. The aggressive wolf warrior diplomacy endorsed by Xi has left China hugely unpopular worldwide, and the relationship with the United States has collapsed. A close alliance with Putin's Russia has been strained by the disasters of Ukraine. China is looking less like a potential colossus and more like a stumbling giant, maybe a dangerous stumbling giant. Xi's own political power may be far weaker than anticipated, but there are plenty of ways he could still quell any opposition. There is little sign of any concerted faction against him emerging within the Communist Party, nor is there any clear sign of who would come next if he did fall. For the moment, the future of China is still in Xi's hands. Now comes the COVID tsunami, the invisible enemy CCP has never encountered before. Since the COVID policy U-turn, Xi has fallen silent. Given the government's obsession with control, it is striking how little it has prepared for such a drastic exit from the policy. The country has fallen short on preparations like bolstering the elder vaccination rate, upping surge and intensive care capacity in hospitals, and stockpiling antiviral medications. While experts outside of China warn of a dark winter ahead, with some studies projecting over 1 million COVID deaths, the party's propaganda machine is already depicting a China marching from victory to new victory. By the official narrative, the party, and by extension its supreme leader Xi, is infallible. But no matter how much the party attempts to rewrite history and doctor the collective memory of the Chinese people, parts of the public will always remember their lived experience during zero COVID, the frustration of being confined to home for weeks or even months on end, the desperation of losing jobs and income, the heartbreak of seeing loved ones being denied emergency medical care due to draconian lockdowns. For some, their trust in the government has forever been dented. This will likely have implications for elite politics and the cohesion among political elites who surround Xi Jinping. In 1989, the elites were divided among the line of the conservatives versus the liberal reformers. The liberal faction associated with then Premier Zhao Ziyang gave the protest a much-needed morale booster in critical times. It is difficult to imagine such a faction or individuals exist after the 20th Party Congress. Even if there was such a liberal figure, he would be so isolated that he would not publicly speak out in support of the protesters. In spite of that, it does not mean that elite politicians are not watching the protests closely. China is now at a critical juncture, one in which history has provided little guidance on this political future. And you and I are the witnesses of this critical historical era. Thank you for watching. Please leave a comment and subscribe to my channel. Just click the subscribe button right here. I'll see you again shortly. Until then, be well.